calling to order tonight's work session. It is August 24th, and it is 7:05 p.m. Welcome, everyone. The board is here, staff, Dr. Furman. Good to see everybody today. Right as we get to call to order, we are going to move the safety and security update up to our first presentation. Any objections to that? And then just approval of the agenda. Any changes or revisions to the agenda besides that? Take it away, Dr. Furman.
Welcome. Glad to see everyone here. We've got a full agenda, so we will get started. I am going to introduce Matthew D'Amico. He is our safety coordinator for the school district. He is going to share an overview of our updated safety and security plans, and then help the board kind of go through one of our tabletop activities that we use to help train our staff. So it's going to be a great presentation, and I'm really excited for Sergio and his team. They built this whole huge manual over the summer, and it's a really thorough way to help make sure our staff and students and leaders are trained to keep our schools safe. Pass it off to D'Amico.
Thank you much, Dr. Furman. My name is Matthew D'Amico. I'm currently employed as the security coordinator for City Schools of Decatur. I will be making my one-year anniversary on August 31st. However, 8 years prior to that, I had been assigned to the School Resource Officers Program. So I feel a very high degree of familiarity with the organization. It's been a very positive experience. I really appreciate you giving me this chance. As we can see on the board, we're going to discuss the emergency response procedures and include some of our safety updates. The first point in order is the concept of a critical incident. Critical incidences are unforeseen situations that threaten our staff, students, or the public. It disrupts or shuts down their operations, and it causes physical or environmental damage. These are the unplanned incidents that threaten our people and our property. We're going to talk about who gets to declare an emergency. This is not a straight line. These are elements of the equation. You'll see that we discuss how civil authority, such as fire and police, have a role to play in declaring an emergency. The superintendent and the emergency response team, those at the higher academic or administrative level. And then finally, we have the people on the ground, staff, those that are there witnessing, experiencing the moment. This is not something I want to go line by line with, but this identifies the crisis assessment team, the diversity of views, positions, and understandings that help us recognize the important stages of planning and preparation. Apologize, the mask is choking. Here we're going to discuss some of the safety and security updates we've undergone in the recent time. First, we're going to talk about the SECCOM Systems 2A radio. We've added 75 digital radios to our units, allowing better communication and more transparency. When situations go bad, you need to know what's going on. You need to be able to receive and transmit. Improvements in technology and the expansion of our existing program facilitate that communication that allows us to make the appropriate decisions in real time. We've expanded our security camera systems. Right now, we want to say 20, 25, it's a little bit more than that because it's an ongoing process. Our security cameras allow us to monitor live events, to watch what's unfolding, and also to go back into a post-incident analysis to figure out what happened and where it happened. We have the expansion of access control systems. We must maintain security over our doors. We need to control who enters and exits the building. We've added 7 new additional access points. As important as it is to control the doors, we have to create an environment where our staff can come in and out. They have to be able to use the property we've given them. For outdoor illumination, we have upgrades. We own these buildings 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The ability to maintain visual control over them after hours is critical. We've done the updates to the emergency response procedures. This book is designed as a standard place. We provide this to all of our schools. Based on the procedures that we've instructed them on, they create individualized school plans. No two institutions are the same. One of our schools has 1,900 kids, one has 121. We can't create a universal plan that addresses everyone's needs. But we're going to give them the tools so they can individualize their response. Pardon me while I oxygenate. Can you go back one more? We did the improvement of interior signage for first responders. I spent 8 years in our schools. I learned where all the classrooms were. I knew which wing they were talking about. That was wonderful as a police officer to know exactly where to go. But we are not going to have the same officer respond every time. We're going to have EMTs, fire, other agencies involved. We've gone through our buildings, we've identified key signage and improved it so that they can see what's happening.
I want to add to that. I noticed last year, the signs started going up in Westchester, and I was like, what are these signs? I know where I'm going now. Then even in the high school and the middle school, it is such a refresher to see, like, front office this way, all the way, and we're up in the uppermost corner of the 6th grade floor. So those new signages have been really effective. Although the students and the staff have to train their eyes to look up because they're used to them being eye level, but they're really, really helpful. So those have been great.
We're going to move on to the installation of emergency door locks. For years, we have explained to people sheltering in place is a necessity. You have to have a safety fallback position. When you tell people they need to shelter in place, the first thing they're going to ask you is, how do I do this? This image is a split. That side represents the internal view, that side represents the external view. This button right here is the control button. That is the indicator. If we had a situation in which a student or our staff can need to take refuge, enter the room, close the door, press the button, this activates a deadbolt, making the door breach-proof. They still can use the handle for egress. So we've sheltered in place. We are in our lockdown. The door cannot be penetrated, but situations change and rapidly evolve. In the event that they need to leave, they no longer have to worry about obstacles, barricades, interventions. Press the button and exfiltrate. These are all simple options. Emergency response procedures. When we have an emergency, we have a large scale and scope of different types. Include accidents, bomb threats, fire, intruder, weapon on campus, elevator emergencies, weather, and missing person. This is the contrary statement of the night. General response to an emergency. Don't panic and remain calm. The reason we say something so transparently obvious and kind of counterintuitive is that it's critical that we maintain control during stressful situations. At no point do you improve your survival rate by panicking or becoming agitated. We discuss the roles of our system. Contradiction number 2. Have a plan, know the plan, carry out the plan, but be flexible to the circumstances. In rapidly evolving situations, you cannot be looking at page 2, page 3. You have to be flexible. You have to know when it's time to pivot and shift. Types of emergencies, basic things, accident and injury. Being able to determine if you have an injury that requires immediate medical attention or something you can handle in the house. How we handle it when we need to transport out. Bomb threats. Inside the book, you flip to the tab and it explains to you what your procedure is going to be. Basic gist is notify your administrator, contact law enforcement, determine if an immediate evacuation is necessary, or if we can do a search prior to evacuation. There are certain parts of the evacuation procedures that we're not going to discuss, but it reflects the need to know when it's time to go and when it's safe to stay. We do fire drills all the time. We've got this one down. There's not a lot to be said about conducting a fire drill. We are experts. Same issues. Know how the system works, how to respond to it, learn the system and follow the system. Intruder and suspicious person. A suspicious person is someone whose behavior causes you to be concerned. An intruder is someone who you cannot identify and cannot adjust to what are they doing here. The first thing we need to do is communicate with our administrator. We need to initiate contact if it is safe and it is appropriate. We have the ability to partner with our staff, we have our rows. We talk about determining the intent of an intruder and the ability to decide, does this person belong here in the direction, or do they need to be directed to leave? We do not initiate a lockdown immediately. We have to assess and evaluate based on the circumstance. Weapon on campus. The administration needs to determine the source of the information and the validity. We need to notify law enforcement. We need to partner with those that have the resources necessary. Determining if it's a lockdown really depends on what is our understanding of the situation and the possible location of the weapon, the isolation of the subject, and the removal of students from the immediate danger area. Lockdowns. We don't use the fire alarm. That's a contradictory message. We don't use a sound that people associate with evacuating with the direction to take shelter. We're going to use our cells, our radios. We're going to use our emergency locks to secure ourselves in safe places. We're going to position ourselves safely. We are going to make a determination about the type of lockdown we use. The hard lockdown is used for an internal threat. Someone is in the building, we cannot control the situation. Hard lockdown. The soft lockdown is when we have a community threat. This would be an example of a bomb threat in an adjacent building, a suspect running from the police, a hostage situation. It's not on our property, but it's adjacent. Tell me if this seems mundane. We have an elevator plan. As much as we want to talk about bombs and intruders, we have to remember that we are an organization. We have mundane problems as well. What to do when someone gets stuck in an elevator?
We practice that one a lot.
Unfortunately, you're very correct. Severe weather. Another topic that's not exciting and sexy, but ultimately it's real. We live in a community that experiences tornadoes, winter weather, learning how to adapt and recognizing where we can go to be safe. Missing person, runaway, or abduction. These are three distinct elements. A missing person reflects, I don't know where someone is. They're not where they're supposed to be. This is a student or a staff member who I can't locate. A runaway is an individual who's chosen to leave. They are missing in the sense that I don't know where they are, but they chose to leave. An abduction involves a third-party interest. Abduction is the most critical and the most dangerous. The first thing we have to do is communicate with our principals, notify law enforcement, and begin to prepare for this search. We're going to need a description of our individual, we're going to need to search our grounds, and we're going to need to communicate with our families. Quick tabletop exercise scenario. A parent comes to the office demanding to speak with the principal. The parent is agitated regarding the student's class assignment and does not accept the principal's response. The interaction between the parent and the principal continues to escalate, with the parent yelling, I will be back later to take care of you, and leaves the office. Is anybody having any feedback to what that scenario looks like?
What should happen next?
So what do you think could happen next?
I probably find some.
And what is that based on, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it feels almost like a threat. I will be back later to take care of you. And so that would be concerning for me.
That is incredibly concerning. I'm going to challenge anybody to use the phrase, I will be back later to take care of you, in a friendly, positive, appropriate context. That's not normative dialogue. The part that concerns me the most is, Anne leaves the office What you told me is we have an individual in an agitated state. They have left your office. They have not left your campus. We cannot determine their intent. This is one of those situations where we are going to need to locate and establish what are they doing in our building. Does anybody else have any questions? I apologize for the quality of my voice. I promise I speak individually much better.
You're fine.
Those who wish to have follow-up conversations, please contact me.
Thank you, Mr. D'Amico, appreciate it. I know you've done a lot of work behind the scenes in building our response procedures and training staff and running them through the drills. He has just been very much a great resource for us, as being on our payroll. We have access to him anytime we need it, and he is always there at a moment's call, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about safe security plans?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to have you with us. I was thrilled when you came on board last year, because our kids have grown up knowing you, and you know our school system and our buildings and our students since many years back, and so it's just wonderful that we are able to leverage all of your insight and knowledge. This is so important. I know that we needed this update, because last year was a year like no other, and we weren't in the buildings regularly. It was great to see the kids out doing a fire drill the other day, and just to know that, it's great to know that that's happening regularly and that we're prepared.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Now moving on to the policy monitoring calendar.
Okay, so what I wanted to take some time to do today is at the board meeting, we shared the board policy monitoring calendar, the last board meeting. So I just wanted to review this again at the work session today, just to make sure if there's any recommendations for changes or updates, to talk about those so that we can finalize this monitoring calendar, and then use this monitoring calendar to help facilitate the discussion for the work calendar, the work plan. Okay, so the first section really focuses on our ENDS policies, which are vision and mission, academic and foundations, equity and character. And my plan for this is giving updates on these monthly. Schools will be sending me data on a monthly basis. We'll be writing up that summary and sharing that with the board as we go through the school year on a monthly basis. So I feel like we can definitely report out on these on a monthly basis to give that board just that information that you need, see our progress, and give you those quick updates on particularly where our students are in relation to a couple things. Reading on grade level, above grade level, below grade level. We'll be disaggregating that information by grade level, by classroom, by student group, and also math achievement by grade level, whether it's on grade level, above grade level, but below grade level. Student discipline data, we'll be sharing that. Student attendance data. The other piece of data that we'll share is also student discipline data. We're going to be tracking numbers of days that students are missing instructional time, so that you'll see whether it's in school or out of school. We're going to lump that together and then disaggregate it a little bit on that as well. But we definitely want to share, looking at our student data, how much time are students losing instructional time because of discipline consequences. We've definitely upgraded our code of conduct so that we are using out-of-school suspension and school suspension as a last resort. I'm really closely looking at what are other alternative solutions to help our students remain part of our community through PPIS, through restorative practices. But we do want to keep our eyes on that data and make sure that we are giving our students the 180 days of instruction that we've promised. So I'll be working with the teachers and the principals on, if we do have to suspend a student out of school, how do we make up that time with the student? How do we give them that 180 days that we promised for our students? So that's just some of the data that I'll be sharing with you just to keep you updated on that stuff. So any questions about that info?
I think I have a general question.
Yeah.
Which is that the policy monitoring calendar, it sort of begs the question about what sort of monitoring we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that least what I think is called for, is something more than just like a data report or a dashboard. Because what you want to do is make sure that we've got these vision and mission statements and these end goals. And we want to make sure that at least once a year we take a deep dive to see how are we doing, what needs to change, have we got the right goals, do they need to change, are there gaps in this? And so I think it requires, I know that it requires, based on what we've tried so far, some thought about, number one, how should the report be structured? What should be reported? What are the metrics that we're actually measuring? What are the kind of soft things that we want to look at that aren't necessarily in the numbers, but that tell us whether our ends policies, our vision statements are being achieved. But to do it not in a, like what I'm afraid of is that this is going to become like the, like many of the other reports that we receive that we simply look at and pass over and move on. Particularly if we have all of these every month, I don't see how any of them are ever going to get the attention that they need on a sustained and intentional basis, which I think is needed, at least once a year. And so I guess I have a little bit of a concern that we're not talking about the same thing.
I hear what you're saying.
And so I just throw that out there, that I think that it's hard to have this conversation without knowing what the reports are going to look like.
To give that an example, to me, like 2.8 is something as a board, finance, that we are charged with some very clear oversight.
Yep.
And it's just like finance, January through June.
Yes.
I would love an idea of what to expect, feedback timelines, when to do it. I love what Lanita has provided in terms of, and I shared with you privately, the depth of the history of where we've gone, where we've changed. Going into detail about that on this level and what to expect so that we can build it into our calendars, the community can expect it, would be great.
So, pause on that 2.8, go back to the number one ends policy. So, I will be reporting out monthly data, but also, so what I hear you wanting to add on this and add on if other people are kind of interested in this is doing like a state of the school district address, kind of reporting on overall progress and really digging deep into what are the learner outcomes that we've identified in our ends policies, how are we meeting those? Do we feel like, on the track of progress that we're making? Are we headed towards achieving our vision?
But if I may, but not a state of the school address. I think because that's one of the things that's happening lately is that we're getting a lot of reports, there's very little discussion amongst the board. So we just listen. So I come to board meetings and I listen, which is fine, but there's no board input. And so I don't feel like we're functioning as a board. Just don't think we are. We're just listening. And you do a great job. So this is working,
Yes.
but not because the board is steering you in any particular direction or the district in any direction. And the governance model that we've adopted is that we're going to focus on big picture goals and aims. We've defined those. You're going to execute them. And then you're going to come back to us and say, here's how I'm executing the directions that you set for me. You tell me if I'm doing a good enough job. And we decide if you're doing a good enough job and if any tweaks need to be made or if we need to change the goals. I don't see how this isn't going to lead to that. It would not naturally, okay? And so, we had some issues with this. Again, we started, COVID interrupted it. And one of the issues was what should these reports look like? We had a couple reports and we couldn't agree on the metrics or the milestones or whatever. And we really never got, so there's no model for you to follow because we never decided on it. But as a result, but it still needs to be done. But I feel that it's lacking, and I feel that, and this is really a question for the others who are going to be continuing with this longer than I am, but that, but some thought needs to be given to how to make sure that we I mean, there are models that you can follow. If you go, you know, the policy governance, you can go online and find other systems that use this model, and you can find examples of monitoring reports where they say, here's our monitoring report, not on all of our vision and mission, but on these specific aspects of the vision and mission. And here's how we're going to do the reporting. And I feel like looking at those examples for how to put these reports together, because it's much more than just a data dashboard. At least I think it should be.
I'm wondering the lack of discussion, that's more on us. You know, that we aren't taking the opportunity to have the discussion, or, you know, is there times when you want to discuss and we're not discussing? I'm trying to figure out how we can, you know, work that out better.
Yeah, that's a good question. So are you feeling like we don't have the or does anyone feel like we don't have the opportunity to say anything, or is there, that there's not space to say anything? Or are we feeling like the report is answering maybe the questions we had already? You know, so just wanting to see how we might be able to change that, just to make sure that we feel like we're part of the discussion in a fully.
I think it's a number of things. One of them is the structure of the meetings, which is that there's no place for discussion. I mean, our meetings, we've had 4 meetings that lasted about 90 minutes. And, you know, it's not that I want to meet forever, but we're not doing anything. And so you have a 90-minute meeting, the bulk of which is the superintendent's presentation, which is always excellent. But there's not even a discussion period to follow it. We just move right into the chair's report and go. There's not even a question about whether people want to ask questions. We're not talking anymore.
I think that's why we are having work sessions, and we're having more work sessions than we've ever had, because we're having them monthly, and this is a very robust work session that will, you know, like, so I think what I'm seeing is that some of our discussion has moved into the work session, and maybe that's more appropriate, or maybe we also have discussion at the meetings, but I'm seeing like there's no way to go forward except to put one foot in front of the other. And, you know, I think this very high-level discussion is good, but I think we need to just start, like, looking at these reports and then giving feedback and really start digging down into the details of what we're seeing, what we would like to see more of. And then if it's too data-centric, let's pull out some of the qualitative qualities that we would also like to be monitoring and talk about how we can put that into a report format. So I think we need to start somewhere. And this is at least laying out that we're touching on all of the policies, which is very good. And then with each, I think we'll have discussion and drill down. We've only just begun revisiting this piece of work, which is a lot of work, which we were really focused on before COVID. And I feel like, you know, we're kind of getting back on plane with this work, which is extremely important, which you know. So I think, you know, perhaps when we have these reports come to us, is the time to really drill down and talk about them.
I agree. So the only way to start is one foot in front of the other. I haven't seen, so there's a distinction between, and one of the things, you know, you focus on this policy governance, is the board needs to be focused on the long-term big thing. We don't need to be focused on the day-to-day operations. That's your job. There's a temptation for our meetings to be reports of you about how you're doing your day-to-day job. And that's what is happening. And it's not useful because we have no useful input, for instance, to your security plan. It was an excellent presentation. But are the doorknobs the right doorknobs? I don't know, right? And so the board level focus is a little bit more, we must have a security plan. We need to hire Officer Domenico. We need to make sure that these things are written down, that you're doing your training. And at that level, I mean, this is an excellent presentation. So it's not that that's a problem, but it's not as if we discussed it. We didn't ask for the presentation, and we didn't discuss the presentation. We listened to it, and then we moved to the next item.
I had thought at the last meeting that we did ask for the presentation.
Did you?
Yeah.
Good.
Because it being a part of our monitoring, and I thought it was very important. So getting that presentation told me that the work is being done.
All right,
It's interesting to know some of the detail, because I feel like it gives us assurance that he's doing his job thoroughly, for example, and, not picking on Mr. D'Amico, but just like whoever is giving us the report, you're right, maybe we also need to bubble up and make sure we're covering what the high-level policies are, but it does give reassurance to me that our students are safe and secure. So I know, like, having had some update each year, knowing that there's training, I'd like to, even see training, just basically be aware that there is training, the training's being done, and that's something that's important. So I did ask that.
Well, I'm sorry I said it then, and so I agree. And it's, again, I think it's important that it happens. I don't want a series of, or I don't think it's useful for the board to listen to a series of operational reports unless it's sort of an intentional thing. We're making sure that our policies are in place. And I guess my last sort of issue is that one of the issues is that, like, for this work session, we have so many items on the agenda that we're not going to have, what we've tried to do in the past, for better or for worse, is to focus so that our work sessions are actually focused on things, items, topics selected by the board that we're going to work on. And, so that there are more work sessions than reports. And I guess that's what I'm going to do.
And I think, I have to piggyback what Heather said. I think breaking up, having more of the discussion in a work session allows us to be a little more effective. I know, just speaking for myself, once it gets to be 10 and 11 o'clock at night and we've all worked a full day potentially and done things at home, it's really hard to then get into the meat of things when it's hitting 10 and 11 o'clock at night. So I do like that we've changed over to having it twice a month essentially, and then we can use these meetings to dig deep. I think this is probably one of the more meatier work sessions that we typically have, but I do like that we typically stay on one or two so that we can really have that back and forth. Some of our biggest discussions, some of our hardest discussions, some discussions that we've had that haven't gone very well have been in a work session. So I think that's where it's necessary for those things to happen. And what I like about what you put together here, especially for some of the things we'll be looking at monthly, is that so that there won't be this big knockout surprise at the end of 6 months. Like, how did those numbers get so far down? Or how did, we didn't see this coming. And so I like the monthly, and maybe we add to it some kind of caveat that we do, as Louis mentioned, kind of an overview. Okay, this is what we've seen over the last 6 months. This is what the report has told us over the last 6 months. So what's happening? Are we doing the right thing? Because we won't necessarily be able to do that each and every month. But I do like the fact that they're available so that we aren't thrown, or if a community member asks the question, we can honestly say, no, according to the data that we just got 2 weeks ago, our numbers are actually going up. So I think it's maybe just a little combination of both to make sure that, we all do get busy as well. So will we always have a chance to look at each and every report? So maybe taking that time once or twice a year on some of those monthly ones to really, dive deeper.
I like the monthly on certain things, because what was challenging for me when I first came on the board was on the calendar, you only were able to go in depth on certain things like once a year or twice a year. And so when I came on the board, I wanted information about certain things, like, well, what about this? But there wasn't time to talk about that, to discuss that. And so, whereas I understand that we don't need to get down into the day-to-day things, but I do like having those snippets of information to see how things are going.
And so with the districts, like the 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, so in September, October, and November, we are going to do a deep dive into those specific categories. And to have that opportunity for discussion at the board session. So we'll be taking 1 month at a time, really digging into those, giving a baseline, looking at the big goals that we think if we're meeting these big goals, then we will be able to achieve our vision and mission. And what will be great is that those ones, I'll add that discussion piece about, are we aiming in the right direction? Do we have the goals that you're looking for us, those big aspirational goals? Are those captured in the right way, so that if not, we don't keep going down a road that's not the information you want or the way the way that you want to see the district moving forward. So we will be taking time to dig deep into those, specifically student outcomes and what we're expecting to see from our students academically, social, emotionally, and behaviorally.
I mean, that sounds good. I just think it's something we need to work on. And
Yeah,
I agree. I
agreed.
like the daily look, the monthly look as well. But the monthly look without the deep dive. Right now, we're getting the daily and the day-to-day. We're not getting the harder look.
Yeah.
That's missing.
That's coming up. Okay. So then with, just moving on into section 2, which are executive limitations, there are some of these that, like strategic plan, that's something that I'll be sharing out, as we make progress on our district improvement plan. But for global limitations, there's certain just reports. Are there other things that you want to see with this? With this one, I just kind of brainstormed the things that I think show that we are meeting this board policy. So this is a place for you to say, hey, would this also show that? And I did put in your packet a copy of the board policies if you need to refer back to the policies. So there's a shortcut on there.
One example of this is that I think on the staff, and I haven't looked, and I don't remember the number, we've had a lot of talk in the past, in recent history, about the staff grievance procedures and the appeal procedures. How can staff complain about their treatment within the school system? How can people complain about the staff? Who gets to go to the board and when? And that's an unfinished piece of business. We've done a lot of work with it. Something was put in place, and then when we sort of went through some issues in the last year, people weren't happy with the procedures that were in place. It's something that we need to revisit, in my opinion, because it didn't make people happy.
I only knew of one person that wasn't happy about it. So far, we haven't really implemented the grievance policy that was put into place.
Well, my understanding of it is, I kept hearing that the grievance policy was half done, and that we got it to a certain point, and we didn't sort of get it over the finish line.
Oh, it got finished.
Okay, and so maybe we don't need to look at that anymore, but to me, that would be an example of let's take a look at the grievance policy and see if it is in fact finished and if any changes need to be made. And it seems like that's the kind of thing that the board should look at and say, this is an issue that's come to our attention, we should look at it and see, and so we should be saying as a board, unless y'all aren't interested, but that's the kind of thing that we need to identify and say, let's have a work session on the grievance policy and dig into it and see if it is what it needs to be, would seem to be.
So I guess one of my questions is, based on the way the policies are written and based on how we were previously doing this, there was the policy and then the administrative regulation. So the grievance wasn't a policy, it was a grievance procedure that was administrative regulation. That was, the board policy says you must have a grievance policy in place. We have an AR to do a grievance policy. So is that board work, or is that policy or practice, or the day-to-day practice?
So
that's where I'm needing a little clarification from the board.
So I'm giving you my opinion.
Yeah.
Y'all are free to disagree with me, of course. But, we spent all this time with this policy governance model, and what I'm trying to do is say that this is the model that we adopted, and this is what we were expecting to happen when we wrote the policy book the way that we did. So the idea was to have a general policy that would be implemented by the superintendent through administrative regulations.
Yep.
But then instead of just taking hands off and saying, as long as there are regulations, as long as they exist, we're done, we would take a look at the regulations and say, are the regulations what they need to be? Do the regulations meet the intent of the policy? And so we would take a look at that. And I don't know that we need to review the policy every single year, although that is kind of the idea of this, is that you do, in fact, look, and if issues come up, maybe you dig into it. It had been my understanding, based on not just the comments of one person, but I've heard other, and I honestly can't sort out what people say in my memory, but that some pieces of the administrative regulations either didn't get finished or left with some disagreement among staff about what they should say, but that there wasn't total consensus that we had nailed it
Yeah.
with those policies.
No, I agree. So, the administrative regulations kind of got COVID paused and not picked back up, but we are in the process, and that's part of this process, and that's why this is a really meaty agenda, to make sure that, because some of this stuff on here is stuff we still have to do, but making sure that it's in line, those ARs are in line and ready to report out what you want to see for that policy.
Could that be something that we add to this report schedule, is line up basically the ARs with the policy and have them in another column, just so that we know which ones to refer to and we can touch on those in the appropriate board meeting or work session where we're discussing it, and as well as reviewing whatever monthly or periodic report we're getting from you, also take a look at the AR and make sure that it's lining up, and that we also agree with the AR, or if we need to modify the AR, that's when we discuss that particular AR, and that way we can make sure that we're touching at least on all of them once per year, and we may not need to go delve deeply into many of them if there aren't going to be changes, but occasionally there may be one where we really feel like we have shifted and need to make some updates.
And I would think as part of that you'd want to know, we need enough visibility into what's, who is it who is complaining or is dissatisfied with the current administrative regulation, and what are the issues? And, that's your work, not ours, but the whole point is that we step into your world kind of on an annual basis and see how it's going. And so we need a little bit of visibility to kind of hear. And then we think, well, I hear you, but nothing's perfect and this is good enough.
Isn't that where we were going? I mean, I felt like we had that process in place and we're implementing that just before COVID hit. Like, we were starting to, at each meeting, touch on several ARs, review them, discuss them, and line them up with our policies. So it feels like we just need to pick back up on that.
But the ARs are district implementation of the policy, which is not policy governance. So policy governance is you write the policy, the admin team writes the AR.
And then comes back and reports.
And reports
And it's that reporting piece that's missing.
Right. And
It's not that we did the AR.
Right.
But we do get a report about what are the problems that you confronted as you put this together, what are the the pieces of disagreement, and here's how it resolved, and so here's the final AR.
Okay.
And then the board needs to say, well, we respect your judgment, we delegated that, you made good decisions, and we're happy.
Okay.
But we're persuaded that you thought about this the right way and did the job and have executed your discretion well.
Okay.
But we at least have listened and sort of passed on that and then move on.
Yep.
I'm not being violent, I just kind of thought that's what I was trying to say with finance.
Yeah.
It's so clearly our job,
Yeah.
we say what we want, you provide us with data, we provide feedback on whether we're hitting those metrics or not. We tell you what our priorities are, you give us reports on those priorities, period. That's how it works. As a district, as a well-functioning board, et cetera. Finance is a very clear one. It can be grievance policy, it can be, you name it.
Okay. So, and most of these are like reporting out on the ARs. Or
Well, sometimes the data will
Right.
identify what needs to be a priority. You present us with some, data on discipline issues, that becomes a priority. We need an AR to address. You're data driven, I love that, right? Like, if you provide us some data on finances, which is by outlining from January to June what we're gonna hit, that becomes a priority. You provide us some data on staffing and an annual report, okay, great. We'd like to see a policy from you and your staff on how you're gonna deal with that, and how it's data driven, and how we're gonna do it, great, thank you very much. We agree that should be a priority. Yeah.
All right, so are you okay with kind of where we're headed on these? Because like most of these are reports out on what the ARs are out there. Some of them, like some of the board policies, make sure this happens. So if we make sure that happens, the report out would be, there's not a necessary AR, it's just, hey, yeah, everyone signed off on the ethics training, done.
The only one that comes to my mind, and I wish I'd said it earlier, is kind of the intersection between the, our equity work and the safety and security work. a little bit. I know that's a national conversation. And I've been very impressed with Officer D'Amico and his work, but just, I think it's incumbent on our police officers to be a part of our schools, part of our community and stuff like that. And I'd love to see that moving forward as well. As a board member, I would love to see that if our officers are called to the school system, that I feel confident they do it in a way that I feel comfortable.
Tell me more about that.
I was gonna say, what is,
Yeah.
Well, I'm not gonna shock anyone saying that, there's a whole conversation about the way that policing happens in this community, in this country, et cetera. Something that I'm very aware of, having police in my family, is just sort of like something that I've talked to with the Decatur police, having gone through the trainings. They do such a good job of making themselves known in the community, making themselves known amongst high school students, that they build that trust. I'd like to see that report from our officers as well, so that as a community member, I feel that trust and that faith. That's all I'm saying.
like what specifically is being done in those areas?
Yeah.
Less commercial and perspective?
Correct. So the community feels trust and faith that when they show up, they're not gonna feel that.
And that's an interesting one, because our SROs are employed by the city police.
Totally understand.
So we kind of have them in our buildings, they're assigned that as their beat location, that they really are trained and supervised by city, Decatur police.
And I've sat through training by the city of Decatur Police Department, and they're aware of this. I've heard about the presentation on the housing department. I've heard about the presentation on other areas where they're aware of this. As a school board member, how that trickles into their involvement in our schools. I'd love to see some of that data.
And I think, as we stated earlier, we were just kind of digging into this, and so I think that the platform that you've laid out is a good one, but we really won't know, the same as when we first started it before, and we got some reports, and we're like, okay, that wasn't quite it, until we needed to revamp it a little bit, and I think that's really where we are right now. So for me, this looks good as a start, and then as we start to really dig deep, we can decipher whether or not we need to go a different direction, or if it's working for us and allowing us to get, what the purpose of doing these meetings really was the goal.
I have one more suggestion, which is that part of what's going on is that we, as a board, but mostly the former board, spent a lot of time kind of deciding to adopt this model, which is not the only model that a school board should follow. And so what I'm talking about would fit within that framework, which may not be the framework that this board wants to follow. I think it's a good one. I think the reasons we adopted it are sound. So I believe it's the right one, but I'm leaving the board. But one way or another, it seems to me that some thought about that, like some board retreat time spent with a policy governance person saying, here's how it works, here are examples of the kind of reports, here's an example of a monitoring schedule, would be really beneficial, so that everybody could either say, this is what we want to do, or we want to go a different way, but we kind of, can give it some thought and make a decision and go with it. And then if we decide to continue with this model, you've got some go-bys that you can use. And,
Yeah, we had some go-bys before we started building those reports. And I'll just be completely frank, we would send as cabinet members, uber man hours putting those together, present them to the board, and then they were kicked back to us, saying, nope, this is not at all what we wanted. We wanted all these other things. And so it was a lot for cabinet members, all the background work we did. Now where the translation got lost for what the board really wanted to see versus what we were given to create, I think maybe there was a gap there. But it was difficult, because we would spend hours and hours and hours building those reports and being ready to present them, and then had to start all over several times. Yeah, so that was tough. That's why I wanted to get up front on this, so that I don't have cabinet members building reports that aren't gonna be what you want.
It's smart to go through all the reports that we currently have, because we have a lot of data and a lot of information, and then identify the gaps and say we need to fill them in with this information, whether it be qualitative or quantitative kind of reporting. And then based on that, I think we can build on this structure that we have.
Like the finance one, we've got a lot of stuff listed there in finance, but, you know, maybe that could be another work session just on finance. What do you want to see when it comes to finance? You know, what particular types of reports? I know James liked the one where it showed you the percent of the budget that was spent, what was allocated. That's a good report, but how does that link back to our strategic priorities on staffing, so that's the other piece of this conversation, are identifying those strategic priorities. We've got academic outcomes that we're looking for in the end policies, but are there particular strategic priorities that we're interested in achieving as a district, like more competitive pay for paraprofessionals or better pay for first-year teachers? Some of those strategic priorities, I think, need to be identified so that we can then monitor that data and be ready to say, here's the data, here's how you want us to measure it, so we know if we're hitting the goal that you're looking for us to achieve.
I feel like that's exactly right. And you know, like the budget items that we've talked about in the past had to do with how conservative or aggressive is our budgeting. You know, what should the fixed policies be about what the reserve should be at the end of the year? But more importantly, you know, historically we would have these cataclysmic budgets that were always way over conservative, and we've tried to tighten it so that we're actually predicting. You know, those are the kind of policy decisions about how should the budgeting be done, and then the priorities are what are we doing about teacher pay, or maybe more strategic instead of lockstep pay. You know, there are other models that we've always talked about. Should we move to those? But to me, those are the board level kind of things.
Exactly.
That we're talking about.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move forward with this and report out, and just know as we are presenting these, feedback is, we'll open it up for discussion and ask for feedback. Are we where you want us to be with these? Are we headed in the right direction? Is there more information that you want that we can provide regarding these? But we'll move forward with these. I think it's going to paint you a really interesting picture of what you see, and, you know, have your eyes in on the behind the scenes.
And did we decide that we were going to add
AR,
correlation
I
to
think
AR?
that's,
That sounds good.
yeah, okay. So into the next agenda item, that finishes the calendar, which actually kind of leads us into the work plan, and that's actually linked in the next agenda. It's the board calendar. It's the one that kind of a list out of all the monthly meetings and their dates. So it starts out with month and date, meeting agenda topic. That one. Yep. Yep, there we go, Gina. So the grayed out ones are meetings that have already passed. We've done these. So if you want to look at August 24th, that's our current work session with the calendar that we have there. So what I was hoping is maybe we can just get through December with calendaring out any other big topics that you want to discuss for that.
How far back in the pack is this?
54.
Is it-
54. Yep.
is it-
So if we look into September, that exec session on the 14th, and the major topic for that one will be to finalize my evaluation tool and the annual goals that are linked to my evaluation tool. And then for the board meeting, the big discussion items that I have listed there, like I said, we're going to spend time really digging into each of the pillars from our district improvement plan. So we'll have that presentation. And then Heidi will also have the development report ready for that meeting. And then Ms. Walker will be sharing our the annual human resource report that monitors all the staff policies. Any other topics that we think we want to add from the policy monitoring or other big agenda items for September? Oh, and then, sorry, in the work session, we've got the foreign language program evaluation presentation.
Based on the conversation we just had, and it doesn't need to happen at the very next meeting, but we should probably work in a conversation about, and/or incorporate some of the training regarding how we're going to operate and whether we're going to continue with policy governance, and if so, really delve in and make sure we are comfortable with that. So it could be a topic, I think it's probably more appropriate for a work session, but something, sometimes further.
Also, I don't know if this is a board meeting topic or a work session topic, but I know that we had the presentation by the students at the last board meeting about the name change of Renfro, and we, considered giving a response. But I know that we wanted to have some conversation about that, and so when is the most appropriate time to have that conversation?
Let's see, y'all, what do you think?
I would probably say that having it in the board meeting would be a good idea. Much like we were doing in the email, just kind of give our thoughts on it, our suggestions on, which way you want to go. Do we all agree there should be a name change? That would probably be the first step, and then what that name should be, and maybe bring some ideas to the table on, what that looks like.
Well, one thing I would ask, I know that I feel like we owe it to ourselves and to Mr. Renfro to actually inquire, instead of just assuming that because somebody on a blog said something that it's true. I just think that we owe it, and I'm not saying it's not true, but for goodness sakes, let's at least find out if there's a basis for it. And I've done a little bit of looking myself, and I'm, and I'm pretty sympathetic to the petition, but not based on. I don't see any, and what I can find, which is not much, only because I don't have access to the old AJC articles or whatever that would show me what was said. But I mean, it doesn't look to me like he was an anti-segregationist, and the charge was made that he was. That's a heavy charge, and I don't think we should throw stuff around like that unless there's a basis for it. That doesn't mean that it's still not a good idea to change the name. It really might be. In fact, what I've seen so far, like I said, I'm pretty sympathetic to the idea because, I mean, just the era, it's tough to go look at these things. But before we have the discussion, let's try to get some information instead of just having a discussion based on he said, she said. And I'm not saying that we need to engage somebody to go do it, but let's try to be informed about it before we make a decision. And, if we could have someone look into it, I just think that would help.
Yeah, we'll dig around, see what we can find, put together a presentation, and then open it up for discussion.
I've done enough looking to know that that if you and again I asked my they only had access to AJC articles back to like 1980 or something, which doesn't go far enough. But my understanding is that there's a ton, so I don't think we're gonna have any problems finding enough of a record. But I would just feel kind of dumb if we didn't at least look and see what the record says before we do this.
My only concern about the record, well, I don't know what the record is, like what the record is. Because we know that those documents may not necessarily reflect negatively because of the era. And, I guess we know when Brown versus Board of Education was, and then how long it took for the city of Decatur to desegregate. My frame of reference for this conversation is not what was posted in the blog, but what I have learned from Mayor Elizabeth Wilson, which we dramatized in the play We Remember Beacon Hill at Renfro on 2 occasions, 2 Black History Month programs, where he did not want to desegregate summer schools, and where the Black city of Decatur, the Black students indicator had to go to Washington High School for summer school, and he didn't want to provide the resources for them to be able to stay in the city of Decatur. And so, it'll be interesting to see what the record shows, but what we also know to be true in terms of the timing of desegregation, and then people who are still alive now, parents and students at that time who experienced, education under his leadership.
I completely credit that, and like I said, I think that I've looked enough to think that I am very sympathetic to the name change. I want to be clear. I just think that you're providing information that I didn't have, and so instead of just saying an allegation is made and therefore we always believe every allegation, let's change the name, let's fill that out, and so let's hear that in a way that we understand what we're doing. And again, I believe that it's a very compelling thing that it's some history that you gave that I didn't know. That's my point, though, is I didn't know it, and I would like to.
But I don't know if that's gonna be I don't know.
We just provided it. I'm not saying it needs to be like certified and stamped. I'm just saying let's do a little bit of diligence, and you provided some, okay? So that we're all coming from the same place, with similar understanding.
And I think my concern with it is that this isn't the first time it's come up. And so that's another reason why I don't want it to kind of keep getting kicked down. I remember talking about this a couple of years ago and, throwing out the idea and also do some research, does it make sense? And then somehow it stopped. And
So let's set a deadline. Let's do, how much can you do and make a presentation at the next meeting? I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
for all that.
Yeah, that's what, I just want to make sure we do, keep our eye on it because it is something that's been brought up a few times and I want to address it one way or the other. So, yeah, I agree.
Absolutely, and I tried to make that clear in email. The things we name buildings after, we should be proud, right? We should be excited that they share that name. Right? We should have parties, we should celebrate, we should teach that history. That should be our framework. That's all that I was trying to say.
All right, so we'll add that in September. So far for the work session in September, anything else you think we need to add to at this time? We may have other stuff we want to add at a later date, but any other big presentations?
Yeah, I think the one for September 28th is one that we always, want to learn more about. Clearly, there's been discussion in the community as well about it, so I hope that we can keep it at that one, so we can really, again, dig deep and look at the data that you'll be able to provide from the last year's, specifically over the way that the hours have been split and used in the different schools, and are we seeing the growth that we want to see with that?
Is October the appropriate date to get the attendance numbers update, or is that more appropriate for September? I know that we're held it up fall, but just where we are.
Like student attendance?
Yeah, with total enrollment.
Oh, enrollment, gotcha.
Asha, you're not gonna be here for a September board meeting, right?
Not the board meeting, I'll be here for work session.
Should we shift the conversation about Renfro to when we're all present? And do it either at a work session or October?
I think we should keep it in a board meeting if everybody agrees with that. We can do it in the October board meeting. That'll give us all some time to do our individual research and bring something to the table.
The only other thing that I was trying to get into September was Dawn's legislative priority presentation.
Oh, right.
Great.
Right, we do need to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll add that to the work session for September.
Or the board meeting, is that something is it time sensitive? Should we do it at the board meeting?
The work session.
Okay.
As one of the priorities, historically, one of them has been the tuition piece. I still have those questions that I asked when we discussed tuition. It was never clear to me whether our thoughts about tuition were consistent. Because, like, I read the statute, and someone said, well, it's more complicated now. Well, I'm reading the words of the statute, that's what it says, right? So I'd like to confirm
Okay.
the interpretation of the statute is correct, and if it is, then it seems like that should be an even higher priority than it was in the past, because it's actually caused us not to consider that as an option to fill the gap, which we've always thought was available gap.
When you see the enrollment report, you will quickly see we don't really have much. Once those students that left us for COVID come back, we don't really have much of a gap.
I understand, but it's a long-term issue, and so when you look at budgeting and when we look at facilities, one of the things is that if we overbuild, we can always fill the tuition seats, and because if we're ever going to get it changed, we need to get it changed now so that it's available 10 years from now, because it's got to be a long-term plan. I'd like to get to the bottom of those questions, because I had the questions, and I'd at least like to know whether the interpretation was correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Something that, and we've talked about, and then I don't see it here unless I'm missing something, is just that our long-term vision for the ECLC and the pre-K program, and just are we serving, all the students that we should be serving, and what's our long-term vision for that? I really feel like we need to pick that back up and have that conversation as to how are we going to even approach that. That's a big one.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that this year.
Whenever it makes sense, but it's I don't know that it's, like in terms of, timing throughout the year, I don't think it's time sensitive to any particular time of year. It's really just when are we ready to start having that conversation? Because it's probably, to start that conversation is probably.
I think that lines up with the budget season, because to me, that's a budget priority that we're gonna have to budget for over time, to implement. It's adding students that possibly may not be able to pay. So I would love to say, hey, every kid in Decatur Housing Authority has a spot at Fraser Center or ECLC or wherever. But that is, we know they won't be able to pay the full tuition, so either we have to supplement or give them a scholarship.
Or is there even space?
Or, right.
That's talking about this land we have
Yeah.
over here, like, that's why I think it's a very, long-term, it could be that we are going to build something bigger and serve more students and, be, maybe just more, have the, the numbers make sense. Like, if we serve more students, we might be able to also serve more students of need and also do it on a more efficient scale. So I'm hopeful, that maybe that could be an outcome, but we need to even just start. And I think one thing will be budget, the other will be like facilities planning and,
Yeah, I have both of that. I have kind of that tagged for when we get into budget season and start looking at what priorities we have in our budget, so that we can start building out a good 5-year budget with that priority in mind of, hey, we're gonna be, we want to build the ECLC, another site, we want to convert the other one to whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
So
that's
there's
the
probably-
perfect time to.
Yeah, so I think there are gonna be short-term goals in there and also longer.
100% goals.
The other,
I was also, maybe think about this, but I brought this up in my last meeting, was about DVA, what our long-term goals are for the Decatur Virtual Academy. I don't, where that should, I'd like to see a presentation about DVA and what our long-term goals are.
So I've got, in October, just digging into the student learning pillar. If we can add it into that presentation and kind of talk about what we're seeing with our families and what they perhaps want to see. Also, as we get into renewing our charter, or if we decide to renew our charter, how that's going to play out, and if DVA will continue to be a part of that.
so, I agree. I think that we should have, and it would seem to me that a focused, like that would be a work session topic. That we'd say, what are we doing with DVA? Are you suggesting that it would just be a piece of
We
the
can
other?
add it to the November work session.
It's something we need to talk about, right? And
it gives, I thought we probably wanted to give a little time to, for families to really have some experience under their belt. So November would probably be a better time.
All right, yep.
the other priority that's kind of similar, or I say it's a priority, or the other issue that we hear a lot about from community members is this athletic facility. And, I have no idea where we are in the process from that, how we're going to make a decision. are we throwing in to fund something over there? You know,
We've got to wait and see if the block gets approved. So right now, we are definitely on hold for making any facility planning until we get SLOST approved and it's on the November ballot. So once that gets approved, then we've got, several $1 million, about $30 million, so that we'll have to plan for facilities and strategic goals for. So that's why I haven't really brought up any facility stuff, because we don't, right now, if SLOST doesn't pass, we don't have the money to do any kind of additions. So we really need to wait to see if that gets approved. Yeah, so that's kind of where that is, sitting in there in the pause button.
I also had a question about the timing of the superintendent evaluation. We typically put that in November. Sometimes it's been kicked to December, but it's typically been done before the start of the year, and I was just curious if like how the board feels, but if we should continue that, because I feel like then, the reason why we thought that was good previously was because then if there is any constructive feedback to you, there's still time to implement that. And if we wait until the end of February, then there really is just like a few months left in school. So it seems like it's been good in terms of timing to do it in either November, December.
you mean the midterm?
Yeah. Yeah, because we have,
There we
it's
go.
currently
Do it.
scheduled for January 25th, and it's
Yeah.
that's too late.
I agree.
Okay. So we will do-
And I heard you say the other sort of big item I'm interested in, but I think you said you're already serving it up for an in-depth discussion about the language program.
Yes, that's
When is that?
September work session.
Okay. That's coming up next. Good.
So October 12th, we dig it up, the big dig in on October 12th is really looking at our academic outcomes pillar. And that ends policy, kind of giving you historical data, where are we look at the programs that we've got in place, the support, so looking at really, are we headed in the right direction there? That'll be that deep dive.
And we should have, I'm guessing, maybe the map back by then, and then I'm sure like
Exactly.
there's also probably all kinds of supplemental teacher evaluations that we'll have back by then. But the milestone data was interesting, but there certainly are, especially when you get into the higher grades, lower and lower percentages of participants, so this data becomes less meaningful at the higher grades.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see how this fills in the rest of the picture.
Anything else do you think we need to add for October?
You typed in, or you wrote in the info?
Yes, yep.
So I did, and this could be maybe just at the next board meeting, but can you please have an update on the after-school program status?
Oh, the, city one?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're, so I'll just tell you right now, they're up and going K2.
Okay.
They are starting, I think, right either next week or the week after for with kids. Yeah, they were able to get their staffing and they're ready to start getting up and going.
Great.
Alright, so right now, we don't have anything on the October work session, agenda. Do we want to think about some of the any priorities or policies to look at?
Maybe we could just, that thing about the grievance procedures and all that, we could do that. I mean, I don't, you don't want to do something else, that's fine. There were two of them, they were paired policies, I honestly don't remember what the other one was. But there are two, we always talked about it together, it was grievance procedures and I think it was staff, I think one of them was staff grievances and the other was grievances about staff. I think
Oh,
is the way
the students reporting. Students
it was kind of like you do, you know,
Yeah.
like staff due process rights
Mhm.
kind of thing, and then the other was staff grievances.
probably about time to have a discussion about PBIS. Or would we want to wait maybe for a little bit more into the year?
So November 9th, at that board meeting, we're gonna do that deep dive into positive culture and climate, and that includes PBIS. Yeah. And at that November meeting, I'll also give kind of a bigger, wider, like state of the district address, just to kind of say, hey, here's where we've been, here's where we are, here's the next steps moving forward. As part of my comments. We also do teacher year recognition. December, I don't currently have anything slotted for the December board meeting, and we don't have a work session in December.
Yeah, I don't know that we always have had one just because it's quite crazy, so,
Yeah.
we may not have the work session, but, I guess we have a little time to fill out that agenda for December.
We'll talk about January.
So then what I'll do is just, as I kind of went through the policy monitoring calendar, if there's anything that comes up and I'm like, that I've tagged for a certain month, I'll add those, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yep, please.
Okay.
And I think, like, with the budget, some years we've begun, like, high-level discussions of budget topics in December. It will be interesting just to get an update, a very high-level update, but we will know then two really important things, like if SLOSS passed and also if the senior tax exemption passed.
Yes.
And we'll know more about what our enrollment data looks like. I think there will be some pieces of the puzzle that start to fall into place, and maybe even just like a very, very high level of discussion there for the deeper discussion in January, may be good. At that point, have you gotten, requests and such from principals, what their needs are? Because some years we've had more information than others, and I was just curious about the timing, like when do you get budget requests for the following year from school?
Yeah, I haven't, so Lanita and I have our check-in tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow, Thursday, she's been out of town.
Okay.
So I hadn't really put too much of the budget on there. I had slated for the October board meeting to do that kind of a big overall budget primer,
Yeah.
just to kind of say, hey, here's what our enrollment looks like, here's what our budget's looking like, here's where we are, here's what we're anticipating for the following year.
Yeah.
That was kind of where I slated it, but if you want to move that up to an earlier time, we could definitely do that.
You had it when?
I had it for February.
I feel like we started talking about it in December some years, but only what makes sense, like you may not have all the information, but like one thing that would just be an informational piece, but that I think will be very helpful to start looking at is just, again, the teacher pay and how are we doing there? Like we've done some good COLA and step increases over the past years, and we have done some salary adjustments over the past years. And one of our goals is to remain competitive and be more competitive with teacher pay. So maybe an update on where we stand with that, since that's probably it is the largest percentage of our budget.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Yeah, having
That's
that
good.
data available.
Okay. Yeah.
I know when we started talking about it before too, that we were talking about a potential shift in the benefits that are given versus the salaries, because I think that's, the benefits is where we supersede some of our neighboring districts.
Mhm.
But that's not necessarily always going to attract the newer teachers and the ones that we want. That may be more important. So I know we were talking about a slow shift in that, so I would be curious to see if we've kind of maybe started that, implemented that,
And that's
maybe get options.
yeah, there's probably, if you, I don't know if you have it all or if you can track it down, but there were some really good spreadsheets that showed all of the teachers and their levels and broke it down by pay scale and put in the value of the benefits and what basically the total compensation package was, not just salaries, since we are very generous with some of the retirement benefits that we offer, and other benefits like the courtesy tuition and such kind of factor into that discussion as well, and that's something we've, as a board, supported continuing. And so I think where our conversation was leading last was that we also want to be able to paint that picture of what's the total compensation package so that it's more accurately reflective of the value of the contract.
Okay, great. That's a good one for December to kind of lead off.
And also, I don't know where it is here, but one of our policies is about hiring and retention, and that's budget related, but also being ready to hit the ground running in January with those career fairs and hiring so that we can, make sure we were also expanding the career fairs and colleges that we were recruiting from to also have a more diverse candidate pool. And the past year, 2 years, we've done a great job at doing our hiring earlier and just making sure we've got our eye on the ball, and like some sort of an update on that would be great.
That's next month in the annual HR report.
Okay.
As part of the HR report, one thing I'm curious about, we've talked a lot about exit interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I ask a question, I'm told, yes, we do exit interviews. And then when I ask exited staff, I say, did you have an exit interview? And it's hit or miss. So often it's like, no one contacted me. And so that's just over the years. I mean, it's not like it's anecdotal,
Yeah.
right? But I would like to make sure, because I think that we should really kind of lean into this exit interview thing and have a process in place where it's, we're going to keep at them until we have a box check that either they refuse to talk to us or we reached out and found out and then process the results in some way. So I wonder if you could speak to that when you talk about HR.
Okay. Being cognizant of time, I had kind of an activity I was going to walk you guys through, but do you want to pause that for more of a retreat conversation? I was going to have you kind of review some of the key trends in employment and then talk about where those show up in our learner outcomes that we've identified in our board policy. Do we want to go through that, or do we want to jump into the vaccination topic? Because I feel like that may be a lengthy discussion.
Let's do that.
Okay. Do you guys need a restroom break while we wait for?
That's not a bad idea.
All right, take 5. She's like, nope. Put it on Tasha's too.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
I mean, it's just, what you need, what's the soundbite you need right now? I'm just kidding. Plus, I think, plus she's here, she can write some more. Am I muted? Eston?
the left are referring to student time off, while the important staff dates are on the right. So it looks correct in the calendar, I just think the summary
I see what you're saying.
needs to say the before.
Okay.
And those are the only two things that but the calendar itself, I think, looks correct.
Any other comments on the calendar? Okay. All right, so then if you guys are okay, we'll move this to the board, action items for, gosh, what's next month? Okay, wow, time flies. Okay, so then board training, Shayna put in there the, board training requirements and some options with the board calendar.
So I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
Number one, you got some his and hers that ought to be fixed.
Okay.
But the other is that with new board members coming on, sure seems to me like a couple front-loaded board retreats. You know, this refers to board retreats in the fall and spring, which is sort of the normal thing. Now, I'm not going to be part of it, but, you know, I feel like a January board retreat where you talk about board norms and the basics of how the board functions. And then I would think, you know, because at that point, it's an introduction, and then I would not wait until fall to have another one. I would suggest that two kind of early, I'd front load it next year.
Well, and one needs to be had about the conversation we just had about policy governance and what that is, and either a training. Yeah, just how to operate. Maybe it's almost just like how to operate.
How we currently operate, what that looks like, and then the second retreat can be kind of more digging in. Do we want to stay with that same framework? Okay, so yeah, I think January would be a great time to have that.
But we really can't set dates until we know who our board members are to be.
And our new board member training through GSBA, that happens during those, conferences or?
Yep.
And that's really good training, but it's also really different. You know, like I think you need full board stuff too.
Okay. The discussion on training calendar plans. So for vaccination, for our, I kind of little, like, is it vaccination or you're immunizing with the vaccination? So in your packet, there is a handout, and it's broken into two sections. So it's staff vaccinations and student vaccinations. So currently, we don't have any kind of board policies or procedures outlining requiring staff to be vaccinated. I did reach out to our council and asked them a couple questions. So first, I asked Bob and Carrie, can we require staff to get vaccinated? They provided a response. And then I said, if we can't require vaccination, can we require those staff who are unvaccinated to take a COVID test either daily or weekly? So they provided some information there. So there's no law that prevents us from requiring staff to be vaccinated. So that's just one of the things that are there. However, if we do want to, as a district, say, yes, we will require vaccines against COVID, then we have to also have a process in place for staff who choose or say they don't want to get vaccinated. And that would be the same interactive process we used when staff were requesting accommodations for working during COVID, such as additional PPE, working remote. So those are some of the things that we can do there if we decide to go that way. And then when I also asked, you know, if we can require staff, if we don't require staff to get vaccinated, and then we say, however, we are going to know if you are vaccinated, you'll share that information, will we or can we require those staff to take a COVID test so we are sure that the staff members coming into our building are not positive for COVID? I think to me, what's alarming about that is we know that the Delta variant can you know, there's breakthrough infections. So that's concerning to me as well, because we know that some of our vaccinated people, you have gotten COVID. So that is a concern. So I just kind of included there some of the information, from our legal counsel and to what they're sharing. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from the board on what's your take on that, and what's your discussion points around requiring staff to get vaccinated, and then we can discuss students.
I mean, as long as it's providing accommodations with the ADA and the Title VII Civil Rights Act, as the lawyers clearly outlined, we require vaccinations to be in the building. We also provided a list of that. It seems like we ought to. We are all vaccinated. We are a community of scientists. As long as, I'll repeat that, accommodations, I wrote down, all employees physically entering the workplace should be vaccinated for COVID-19, so long as the CSD has complied with a reasonable accommodations and provided the ability to provide the vaccine for people. Yeah, I mean, 2 teachers died in Loudoun County this weekend who were not vaccinated. One of our teachers died, I'd lose it.
A fully vaccinated middle school teacher died, I think at MCS.
Yeah.
So, I support, teacher vaccinations. I just think it's the safest thing. We have been saying that we want to do everything we can to keep the students in the building, and vaccinations are our best defense. And so, as long as folks have those accommodations in the process, I think we should do that.
So I said at the last meeting, that's where I am too, and I think that it'll keep the staff safe, but I would really focus as much on students. But I think our students have a right to come to school and know that they're as safe as we can make them. And part of that is making sure that the teachers are vaccinated. And the best way to stop the spread is for everybody to get vaccinated. And I don't think it's fair to ask kids to be in a classroom where the teacher hasn't taken that reasonable step. So I feel strongly that that's the right thing to do. Obviously, we have to provide the reasonable accommodations. I do have a question about what that means and who gets the accommodation. Because if it's an accommodation because, I think that it alters my DNA or that kind of thing, I'm not sure that that's a disability that requires it or deserves an accommodation. And so is it vaccine hesitance that we're accommodating? I don't think so. I think it's more that I have a medical condition that prevents me from getting the vaccine, or in some cases, religious objection to vaccines, which is a whole other can of worms, but that we, I think, to some extent need to accommodate by letting the staff do something, but not be in the classroom, frankly. So I don't know what that looks like, but.
I also feel that we should require it where we are legally allowed to, with the exceptions for those with medical conditions or religious beliefs. And then for those who don't have it, I would like to have frequent and regular testing so that we are ensuring the safety. My priority as a board member is the students and to provide them with as much in-person learning as possible. I think we need to do everything we can to keep our schools open and safe. And we need to prioritize in-person learning. And we know, and the CDC tells us, that vaccinations are our leading public health protection and prevention strategy for COVID. And so I think it's wise to follow that. And again, my priority is to prioritize in-person learning, and I feel that our kids deserve to be in school, and they deserve to be able to be in school in person.
I stand with my fellow board members. The best way to keep staff safe and our children safe is to
to require the vaccine. I would say as far as the testing, because the Delta variant is so strong and different than what we're used to, I don't think that just unvaccinated individuals should be tested. I would love to figure out a way for testing to be more ongoing just for everybody. And I'm not sure how that looks, whether, we go through different schools or it's random. But with so many children, especially getting it without, with being asymptomatic, I think it's very important that the testing is beefed up.
I agree.
Yeah.
Talking about the rate of testing, so even, if we decide to mandate vaccines, I would still, to do the survey.
Also in agreement, and I had kind of put my recommendation in your packet as well, that I also agree that we should require vaccinations for staff, but provide that interactive accommodation process for staff that may have a medical condition and can't get vaccinated, and regular testing. We are going to have our surveillance testing up and going soon. We have another meeting tomorrow or the day after to work out logistics. But I think we're moving ahead, full steam ahead with that and getting that up and going as soon as possible. And that will be weekly surveillance testing. So the company that we've been assigned from the Department of Health, Georgia Department of Health, they're assigned to us. We've been meeting with them, and they'll provide everything. They pretty much bring the staff, the tests, the kits, all the PPE for the staff that come in and do the testing. So only involvement we have for that is the teacher will walk their kids to the testing location, wherever we decide that is, and then walk them back to class. If a student tests positive, we won't, for what I hear, we're not doing the pooled testing. The pooled testing is everyone in one class goes into 1-2, we see there's a positive, we don't know who it is, now we have to PCR every student. The testing that we're going to do is individual, so we will know, Lewis tested positive, he gets a PCR test. I tested positive, I got a PCR test. We know that the rest of the people didn't, so we don't have to test them again. So I do like that we are doing that individual testing for our students. So I do agree. So what we will do next as an executive leadership team is write up pretty much an AR about vaccinations for staff and have that ready for review and move forward as quickly as we can on getting dates and things set to move that forward.
But I did have a question about how does that work with the booster shot? So say, for our teachers who are currently fully vaccinated, that also, if we mandate when we mandate vaccines, then you have to get the booster shot as well.
Yeah.
And only other question is, so we don't have to,
Speak, can we pause on that? I mean, I didn't think booster shots were recommended yet.
They are.
They are.
8 months.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, that just as of the other day.
Yeah.
Just like
Except none of us can get it.
Yeah, you can.
No, I'm J and J.
oh,
Sorry.
and we can get it. No, they actually recommend the J&J to get the Moderna or the Pfizer booster.
So that's an official thing now, and not just,
I started asking that question as well, a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
At 8 months.
At 8 months, yeah, so we took it in March, and so, yeah. 8
when is
months.
our 8 months up? We did it the same day.
Yeah, March 13th.
So we are going to continue our partnership with the CAB Health and Board of Health, and they are mobilizing the vaccine event. So we are planning on continuing that so we can make sure our staff has the vaccine readily available at their work location. So we're going to continue to work on logistics for that ongoing.
Well, and I want to reiterate that we have also, and you have, and the CAB Board of Health has worked hard to make the vaccine accessible, and what has it been, every other week?
Yeah.
I've had a vaccination clinic at the high school outside in the parking lot. There's one this Thursday from 7 to 9, so do another plug for that. And that is so that we can make it very easy for people and accessible to get it. So we're trying to remove barriers there as well.
Yep. And we'll add the booster shots as well during the vaccine event.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to throw out, I believe accessibility is one half of the equation for why someone may not be vaccinated at this point. I think it's also questions, hesitancy.
Yeah.
And so part of the plan, there are many members of our community who are in the medical profession who have offered their assistance, who have made themselves available to staff to answer questions about hesitancy in a private setting. I would love to see that as part of the policy.
Yeah.
to make themselves available. I ran into a teacher at Target this weekend getting my flu shot. She explained to me that she got COVID, but she would never get a flu shot, and that I was crazy for getting a flu shot. And and that was part, she said that she had just had her doctor explain to her that the COVID shot was different, and it was great, and so she got it. And so I would love to see that.
Okay,
Good idea.
yeah, I like that too. Okay, student in, oh, sorry, thank you.
Because, no, thanks, actually, so I know we're going to talk about student immunizations, but I know that when we get to that point, if we decide it'll be an action item, we don't have to do that for the teachers, okay.
The teacher one is, staff is different. There's no policy. This is you pretty much have to write our administrative regulations to implement that. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Students really have to be a board policy. Staff is different.
Have you had an opportunity to speak with the teacher advisory council, about this particular subject?
No, I haven't actually. We had our meeting, they had questions about it, and they brought it up as something, that they were wondering if the board was going to require it, but,
I'm not quite sure how their stance on it.
they probably told me, and I took notes and
No worries. Okay.
remember. I don't want to share wrong.
Right, okay, no problem.
So, students, this is definitely the realm of the board to work on, policies for what impacts the students and what is required of our students. So, that I shared the current board policy that we have, related to student health and wellness. I put that in your packet. It's very general. I also included what the Georgia law states about vaccination, or they call it immunizations for students. And basically, they say you have to be immunized against whatever the Department of Health says you have to be immunized against. That was the chart that I also included, which shows you which immunizations are required for students in school buildings. And currently, COVID vaccinations are not a required vaccine or immunization for students. But this is really wanting to hear from the board on what policy you want us to put in place. And if that is a policy you want us to write, we can draft some language, bring it to the next board meeting for action. And of course, it would be something that, I'd work with legal counsel to craft and approve and send some versions out for you guys to get a preview of, and then have that just, have an approval or an action taken at the next board meeting. So just getting your input, so we know which direction to go.
I think the safest thing to have students also to mandate vaccines for students. Who are eligible for the vaccine. Lewis mentioned that students should be able to walk into the classroom and know that they're safe, that teachers have done their part, and I think it goes both ways, particularly with all of the students that a teacher encounters. And so, again, and us trying to make sure that students stay in the classroom. I don't know why we would treat this any differently from any other, vaccine that's mandated. Particularly as we have seen, all of this illness and death over the past almost 2 years. Yeah.
I have a logistical question. I apologize for not asking beforehand. Do we currently keep up with this schedule of vaccinations for enrolled students at CSD?
Yes, 100%.
I have no idea why we would not add COVID-19 or any other vaccine to become, I don't care how political it gets. If the FDA and CDC adds a vaccine to this list as being approved for that age group, we should add it to the list. That should be board policy. That should be every school system in the country. I don't understand.
Yep.
And we're already doing it. Add one to the list.
Right.
I don't understand. And this goes without saying, Jane would agree with me. Unless there's an accommodation that needs to be taken into account, obviously, your pediatrician says it's inappropriate in your instance, and I assume that that's taken into account now if your child can't take the polio vaccine. So it seems like it's no additional logistical work there.
Again, I think similarly, like with exceptions for those with medical conditions or religious beliefs, I think we need to do what we can to maximize in-person learning for students and minimize quarantine. And I think it's very clear, you know, the multi-layered mitigation strategy that we're implementing is working. And we're being very transparent with our dashboard about our cases, and you can see that there's more quarantining required at the lower level schools where kids aren't able to get vaccinated. And the CDC says when you are vaccinated, you're not required to quarantine. So we see very few quarantines happening at the high schools because many of the kids who are surrounding the kids who are getting COVID have had vaccinations, and I think it's really helping. So I think it will help to keep kids safe. It will help to keep teachers safe. It will help to maximize in-person learning and minimize the quarantining requirements that we'll have to implement, which I think are also detrimental to students, not only for their academic impact, but also for the social and emotional impact that has on students and what that has meant to students who have already missed a lot of in-person learning. I think it's very hard on them also to have to quarantine. And so I would support it for that reason, for those reasons.
I agree. So I do think it's a harder call than staff, and I think, and I'm sympathetic to people who, for whatever reason, don't want a vaccine. I really am. I appreciate that, and but I think that concern is outweighed by the other students' right to be able to be in school and to know that they're safe and to provide a safe environment. I just think that's overwhelming, so I think it's the right thing to do.
Second, my fellow board members, I agree. Do we know if the Department of Health, is this even a discussion at this point, to add COVID vaccines to the schedule?
That I don't know. Yeah, I can reach out to our Department of Health contacts and see if it's on the horizon there, but I don't know the answer to that question.
But we're not suggesting we would wait for
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I mean, I fully support that we should be in front of it and you know, step in front of it. And I agree with what you said, James. If this is what we're already doing, I mean, most of us have had kids in here, and we've had to go through this whole process. And there's definitely been some discussion on how often you give a vaccine or which ones you give. And so I think that this should just be part of that conversation, just like it is with any other immunization. So I fully support that, and we'll just have to kind of handle, I guess, how, for those parents who really do have an issue with it, how we will address that.
And so I will work with our legal team, craft a policy for requiring vaccines for students that are eligible, and then when they increase the age range, we will make sure that it is written in a way so wherever the age range is, it falls. But that we don't have to update the policy once age changes. So I will bring that to the board for action at our next meeting. That concludes all the agenda items I have.
You'll have a specific policy
Yes.
for action, right?
Yes. I'll draft one. Unless y'all run the right one.
We'll let you do it.
For the teacher, that's all just the language that's in the first paragraph of
Yeah.
that. It does raise the question of what does it mean to accommodate, but the language of ADA, EEOC.
The other thing is I thought it was kind of vague in terms of how often they would required to be tested.
And I left that day because I wasn't sure yet.
Oh.
Yeah, if we were not gonna require it for staff, then I was gonna leave that as like the next, what was the frequency of testing? But if we are gonna require it, then we'll probably just scoop them up into a weekly surveillance testing at this point. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to follow this conversation over the next couple of weeks, because this full approval just happened, what was it, yesterday, of the Pfizer vaccine, and it's picking up momentum. You know, hundreds of universities are already requiring it, and employers are having the same discussion around employee space. So I think it's going to be, we may be, the timing of our meeting is just so that we may be one of the first to be having this conversation, but I certainly don't think we're going to be the last. And it'll be very interesting to follow it over the next couple of weeks and months.
The been a very good board meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your input, for your engagement and your conversation. Thank you to everyone that joined us through Zoom and in person. This concludes our work session for August. It's 8:57. We are adjourned.